Welcome to Dosed. And if this is your first time tuning into Dosed, thanks for being here. I do want to highlight, not all of these episodes, probably not many, will be PG. And the areas and stories we cover span across science, spirituality, the mind, the body, alternative lifestyle, and healing. And you may find some of these views or stories conflicting with your own personal beliefs. And if you are upset by them, or ultimately don't like thinking for yourself, the good news is Love Island is coming back on the TV, so you can go and tune into that. Otherwise, thanks and enjoy this next episode. This episode of Dosed is brought to you by Oblak Caps. So Oblak Caps, they provided refuge for me when I was stuck in the classic scroll hole on Instagram. And yellow being my favorite color, their latest cap, which I'm wearing today, Phosphate, totally jumped out at me. So I ended up ordering it from Instagram or Amazon, I think it was at that point, with if I'm honest, no expectations. When it arrived though, bam, oh my God, like the quality, the style, the colors, like really pop. And for me, comparing this to other caps that I've recently purchased, these are, if not the best, one of the best on the market at the moment. But if I'm honest, that's not, the style and everything is not really what captured me. It's when I read their mission, which I'm going to read out to you guys. That was really, it just grabbed me by the nuts. And their mission statement is, our goal is to change the concept that people have of being a black sheep. Many look at these people as displaced, misfits, or those who do not fit into the current mold set. But we see them as real people, without fear of what people say, people who are true to their values and don't conform to the status quo. Harnessing this power as their innate gift, dedicating it to what they love, creating their own path for their life. What a fucking statement. For me, that was like, wow, this is incredible. And I think if you are feeling that and you want to embrace your inner black sheep, go and buy an Oblak cap. We also have a discount code because they are proud. We're proud to be to having them as our sponsors. So if you keep listening through the show, I will drop the discount code so you get money off these awesome caps. And we're live.
Nice.
Joe Webster, how are you?
I'm
how
good,
the
Jamie.
devil are you? This has been what feels like 100 years.
Yeah.
Since we last had a visual conversation. Anyway.
I hope you enjoyed that photo I sent.
Yeah. Oh my God. I don't know what I was thinking. Wearing a black shirt and a white tie. It wasn't a good look then, even now. So
no, I don't think I was doing any better, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, really good. So just obviously kind of fill everyone in. Obviously, Joe and I used to work together at a small online insurance company many moons ago, 13, 14 years ago. Yeah. And obviously I've not seen you since, but I think, I don't know what it was. I don't know obviously you reached out to me. So I think something happened anyway.
Some of the stuff that you were doing with the Few app and, I saw that you were doing this podcast and I was like, seems like Jamie's doing something in a similar area than me. So why not make contact?
Well, and to be honest, yes, that was a couple of months ago, and that was the first time I'd ever even heard the word Feldenkrais. So, obviously at that point, I was like, I should probably do a little bit of digging, just kind of understand. Well, first, to make sure I'm saying the name right.
Yeah, doing good.
But yeah, I guess today it'd be obviously we're going to delve into kind of what Feldenkrais is, the benefits and everything else, but. I guess it'll be for me to start with, really, as we're catching up. Obviously, I remember back then, like you were you were always dressed in black. You had you were like the martial arts kid, let's say, back then. So you could maybe say that you've always been on this path. But was there something even before that because I remember you were into Tai Chi. Is it Tai Chi? Is that right?
Yeah. So I've been doing Tai Chi for about 20 years or so.
Right. I see. So what got you onto Tai Chi in the first? So why would you? As it someone at a younger age, why would you get into that initially?
I mean, sort of just kind of going into obviously as a teenager and going through school and experiencing different things dealing with bullying and stuff like that, there was a part of me that was kind of like, how do I protect myself? And I think that my initial interest in martial arts as a 16-year-old kind of came from that angle. A little bit like, you know, I'm someone that's kind of growing in the world. I need to be able to like look after myself. But I, you know, in some way I'd studied karate and judo when I was like 10. My mum had taken me to classes. So I'd kind of always been doing that sort of stuff. And then when I was 16, I studied with a jiu-jitsu teacher who was a crazy guy. He basically, like, you know, through, like, I studied with him for about 6 months quite intensively. And it was a one-on-one training. So it wasn't like a class. It was specific. Like, I'd go there and I'd train with him for an hour, come back the next week, train again. And I just remember that whole time, like, you know, I learned a massive amount. One particular example of that is that, you know, in jiu-jitsu, there's all these kind of like grappling and locks and stuff. And one of the things that I remember him doing with me, and there's a number of interesting ones, but was to get me into a particular lock that I did not feel any way that I could get out of, you know, like I was completely trapped.
Wow.
And he was just like, and try and keep trying, try again, try and get out of it. And he would just like, literally, like, that was half an hour of class, just like, wow, how do you get out of this situation? And I think, you know, moments like that kind of inspired me on a journey in myself. But then kind of after that, I, you know, there was a little bit of me that was a little bit like, why am I coming out of each class feeling like I'm the one that's being beaten up?
You're trying to get out of it
right.
For half an hour. It's gonna be a natural thing.
Exactly, yeah. So I was coming out with bruises all over, like, you know, just feeling like, you know, so what's the point in learning how to protect myself if I've got to hurt myself in the process? So that, I don't know, it was kind of that thing that led me more into the internal martial arts. So the internal martial arts would like define themselves as the soft styles. So for example, Tai Chi, Bagua, and Xing Yi.
Wow, okay. Whereas
hard style martial arts are, you know, karate, kickboxing, anything that kind of is more muscular. Yeah, more physical. So, you know, like I was an interested teenager, and I was watching Kung Fu films of all varieties, learning about some pretty like wacky ideas coming out of China, you know, like mystical sword play and all sorts of stuff that you've seen in Hero, and, you know, so, you know, I think I was kind of interested in that side of things, like the side that was slightly unexplainable, maybe a little bit magic. And that led me on a journey to like buying books, trying, you know, different techniques myself, and eventually getting myself in a little bit of trouble in that sense, because I'd basically done techniques that I didn't have a teacher to teach me about, and, you know, it didn't end well, and searching for an actual teacher.
I see. Okay.
So at that point I was 18, and I was working in Millets. I don't know if you remember Millets from back in the day, the camping store.
Oh yes, I do. Yeah. Okay.
So I was working in Millets as an 18-year-old, and you know, I'd kind of, in my head, I was like, I need to I need to, like, you know, put this out there into the universe, like ask for some help with this. So I was working one day in my millet store, and this woman comes in. I've never met this woman before. She goes around the shop, collects a couple of things, like, I'm going camping, I need to buy this and buy that. And then she comes to pay. And as she's paying, she's using a checkbook. And the checkbook's almost empty. So, you know, like the old school checkbooks.
Oh God, yeah, okay.
And they've got the tabs on them on the left, right? So this checkbook was like down to maybe 2 or 3 left. So she'd used all 49 of them or whatever. And on the very top one was written Tai Chi 37. And I was like, what's that?
Wow.
And then she basically said, I don't normally carry this around with me, I happen to have a leaflet. I haven't been in 2 years, but I happen to have a leaflet in my bag today for this particular subject. And this is a guy that taught in Belgium, completely not something available in London. He was teaching in Belgium. She'd been to his course 2 years ago. Just that day, she happened to have the leaflet in her handbag and gave it to me. And from there, I connected with my teacher. And
jeez, wow, yeah. That is like that's almost like you say it's meant to be at that point.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it feels like that.
So slim.
Yeah, I was meant to meet that person at that time in my life, and I've definitely learned a lot. Like, he was a master. He was a Qigong master.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
And so talk us through then how would you go about studying for Tai Chi? Because I mean, for those that may know bits about it or not, typically in my mind previously, before this, before us having conversations, I would typically think, okay, you have the visions of like the old people in the Japanese gardens, the Chinese gardens, and they're just kind of doing the slow movements, etc. How is that? What's the true reflection of what Tai Chi is?
Sure. So Tai Chi comes from a martial arts system. So underneath all of the movements that you see these old people doing, there is a fighting application for it. So each of those postures, each of those movements has an intention, and that intention is obviously done in combination with another person, and it's used to either throw someone or strike someone or whatever. But the purpose of the slow movements, and I think this is something that ties in with Feldenkrais, and we can get into that afterwards, but the purpose of the slow movements is so that you can learn good body organization without enacting a lot of muscle tension. So if you do something quickly, you're not going to notice all the fine detail in it. Whereas if you do something slowly, you're going to become aware of everything that you're doing. You're going to be able to manage what you're doing and keep your effort level, keep your muscles coordinated. So the principle in Tai Chi is really to do with like using your whole body in each movement. And again, these are things that I think tie in massively with Feldenkrais, to do with use of the force through the bones. So instead of using muscles to do work, in Tai Chi and in Feldenkrais, there's this idea that you're using bones to create strength and force. So that if I want to push someone, I'm using my whole skeletal structure rather than specific muscles. And of course, all the muscles are there. But if you think about the force that the bone can take along the length of the bone, it's massively different than the amount of contractile force that a muscle has.
Of course. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that would, I'd assume that's why, when you see in typically African countries, or even actually some Asian countries, people are holding stuff on their head. Would that be because of the strength of the spine, the compressed spine at that point?
Yeah, I think the spine's a little different in that it's not, I mean, there's joints throughout the whole skeletal structure, so it's the same in some sense. But the spine has these little cartilaginous discs in between it. So it's not sort of...
it's not as strong as a bone, like a femur.
So exactly. So one of the stories that came out of Feldenkrais is if you're in a lying position and you've got your knee standing, right? So you're lying on your back and you've got your knee standing, your foot standing, so your knee's bent, that an elephant could sit down. If your knee's well aligned, an elephant could sit down on your knee and the shin bone would be able to take the force of that elephant.
Wow.
Yeah, but it's to do with the alignment, and because the way that bone is made, it's made to deal with forces in certain directions.
Right, I see.
And obviously when we have breaks and stuff like that, what's happened is either there's torque in the system at the same time as you're trying to put force through it, or there's impact across the bone.
That's really interesting. So you're basically saying if the force is kind of going downward rather than across it, then there's more strength.
There's a massive amount of strength. Yeah.
And I can attest to that, actually, because actually the whole reason led to being the reason I'm in Malta. But when I first came here, I had a quad bike accident.
Mm-hmm.
I was being an idiot, chasing after my mate down the road, which, I was coming down. So we were going down hills like this.
Yeah.
And so of those that are listening up, some gradients. And on the way down, I must have been clocking 60, 70 miles an hour. And I was thinking, and this is on a narrow road as well. Like, 2 cars to get past is not impossible because it's just a one way. And I thought, okay, I need to pull the brakes because I'm going too fast. And in doing so, the brake pads are slightly off. So then that veered me just onto the barriers, flipped up basically onto my head, but then immediately thought about getting my feet down and up because I was worried about the bike rolling on top of me.
Yeah.
And managed to do so. As I did so, and this is I'm going at some pace. Like I landed literally on my head and then rolled straight up and jumped up.
Nice.
This must have been at least a 40 mile an hour roll.
Wow.
But what had happened, there were no problems other than a dislocation to my big toe.
Yeah.
Where, and that's probably because I'd imagine then because of the bone, so if it was a weak bone, perhaps then it would have snapped, or if maybe it was coming from a different angle.
Yeah. But it's to do with torque. So for example, anything that's kind of like you're doing something that is twisting along the length of it as you're putting pressure through it. Whereas if you're it's the same, like you just said about the quad bike and braking.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty well known that you brake in a straight line. You don't brake when you're turning.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. As soon as you try and brake when you're turning, you're liable to have an accident.
Yeah. You
brake in a straight line, even in Formula 1 at 300 miles an hour, right? You brake in a straight line and then you turn.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the same. It's the same as bone, basically.
Yeah, nice. Wow. So just to finish up then on Tai Chi. So what did it involve? Is there any actual studying involved? So I can appreciate you've got a nice skeleton and everything behind you. But was it all pure? Was it kind of physical kind of training, or was there any kind of?
So I would say, yeah. So I'd say that mostly it's physical training,
mm-hmm.
but the system of Tai Chi has underneath it a kind of deeper philosophy.
Sure.
So the Yin-Yang Philosophy, which obviously most people are familiar with, but maybe they don't know the scope of it. So, for example, in Tai Chi, just if I shift my weight from one side of my body to the other, mm-hmm. they would consider that the side that I'm shifting my weight onto, that becomes my standing leg, and that's a yang energy. So it's full, right?
Wow.
Whereas the side that I'm not standing on, that's empty, and that's a yin energy, right? So then there's this constant play as I'm going through the form of changing between yin and yang. And that's, the kind of the philosophy underneath it, in some way you could say is like a spiritual practice. Like the beginning position of the Tai Chi form in all Tai Chi forms is called Wu Ji. And it's the place before the division of yin and yang. So you start in that, and then you come into activity. In activity, it splits into opposites. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of go through the form, and then at the end, you go back to that place of being in between opposites.
Okay, wow. No, okay, it's really, there's so much to it, which is good to at least kind of like scratch the surface on. So before we then jump straight into kind of Feldenkrais and what you're doing with it, it'd be good to maybe kind of get a bit of history on Feldenkrais. So he was his name is Moshe Feldenkrais.
Yeah.
So it'd be good to kind of hear a bit about him, his background, and how this kind of method all came about.
For sure. So, I mean, segueing from the martial arts stuff, he was an avid martial artist, and to his detriment at some certain times in his life, I would say. But so he moved, and I think we spoke about this briefly before, but he moved when he was 13. He left his family, and he moved to Israel.
I remember how insane that would be.
So
and this is back when?
I've met a couple of people in my life that have made a decision at 13 to kind of like head out on their own. And they've always had something a little bit unique about them, like unique in a good way. And I think that he had this, I don't know, self-drive or self-belief from a really young age. And it took him in some pretty interesting directions in his life. So when he was over there, he was part of the Haganah, which was like an Israeli defense force.
Okay. And when was this exactly? Was this the 50s, 60s?
No, this was early. This was 1920 or so. Between 1920 and 1930, I think.
Okay.
So I think, and I can't remember exactly the situation, the political situation, but there was a lot of oppression and people kind of routinely getting beaten on streets by one particular faction that I think was the government.
Right.
And he basically was part of this defense force where he was reading books about jiu-jitsu, understanding the techniques, teaching them to other people so that these people who were lay people could protect themselves, from this oppression.
Nice. That's good.
At the same time, what he did was, he was reading across a variety of subjects. I think I've heard somewhere that he read about 10,000 books in his lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah.
and Blinkist wasn't around then either, so it doesn't really count. That's a proper reading. Wow. It's incredible.
But he was studying, or he came up with this particular technique that was utilizing our natural flinching response to an incoming object. And he put on a martial technique on the top of it. And this is something that he got an idea from a biologist called Pavlov, that's basically to do with adding on behavior onto a habitual response. So our habitual responses are something that's innate to us. We react in certain ways. If I throw something to you, you close your eyes. Maybe you do something with your arm. Maybe you clench your stomach. Those are like inbuilt primitive responses, and we don't have much control over them. What we do have control over is what we connect with them. So if that's something that's very quick, like fast twitch, and you're going to react very quickly, if you can then learn to kind of carry that on into a specific technique, it's going to have all the power and the speed of that natural response. Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So later on, he moved to France, and he met Jigoro Kano, who was the founder of judo, who had traveled over to France with a retinue of people. And he, yeah. So someone who knew Feldenkrais had given Kano Feldenkrais's book that he'd written on self-defense for this Israeli defense force. And within it, there was this technique that was the addition of a technique on top of a primitive response. Kano basically invited Feldenkrais to dinner with this whole Japanese retinue of his and asked him to demonstrate this technique to him.
Over dinner, like just throwing the salt and pepper at him or something.
Yeah, exactly. So he did it, and Kano was very impressed. He said, "You haven't thought about this aspect." And he asked him to do it again, and Moshe realized that within about 5 seconds he was blacking out. So what was happening was that as he continued to do the technique on Jigoro Kano, there was pressure being applied on his own throat, and it was blocking an artery, and then at some point he passed out. So obviously you see the skill of Kano. And after that, but despite that, he was very impressed that this Westerner had come up with a technique that hadn't been thought about within the whole doctrine of judo, and they then incorporated it within the doctrine of judo after that.
Wow.
So
what a meeting of minds. Can you imagine that? Imagine being at dinner going, geez.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just to finish that little story, then Kano was like, you're obviously someone that, you know, knows a lot about this stuff. I want you to be the representative of judo in Europe. And so Feldenkrais started the first judo school in Paris, 1930s, 1935, something like that. And that judo school is still running, and it's got a plaque on it to this day with his name on it. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's incredible. Okay. So there's some close alignment then, obviously, to judo and Feldenkrais, right? And actually, I do remember seeing that he kept, or he used this method that it almost looked like he was falling over on a banana peel. Kept doing this to I can't remember exactly what it was for. I just remember watching something. Where someone was doing the movement to try and prove something. Do you know much about that?
Yeah, so I think that you know, one of the issues that he had, which is I think how the Feldenkrais method kind of evolved, or like how it came out, was that he damaged his knee really, really badly. And he did that playing soccer when he was, I don't know, maybe in his 20s or something. And it had been an issue for him. At a certain point, he re-injured it. Because he re-injured it, he sought medical advice. And there was a point where they said, because of the surgeons and what they were capable of at that time, you've got a 50-50 chance of being able to use your leg after we operate.
Great odds. Okay, wow.
So essentially he was like, you know what, I'm gonna do this myself. I'm clever, I understand this stuff, I can, you know, listen to my body. And what he did from that point was kind of go on a journey in himself to understand how he used his knee, and how his knee was, you know, maybe because of habits that he'd developed through his life, not operating in a way that was good for him, or, you know, helping him. So he spent a lot of time working on the stability of his knee. And one of the ways that he would do that was obviously testing the stability of his knee. So he had quite a lot of damage, and I can't remember exactly the type of damage.
The cruciate ligament, maybe? Or?
Yeah, I think he had destroyed a cruciate ligament or two.
Wow. Which is, you know, that's horrific in itself.
There was a large amount of damage, and I don't think that he could use his knee in a way that most of us can.
Right.
But he had learned very well how force travels through his knee, from the top bone to the bottom bone, and he had learned it in very fine detail in himself. So, you know, what we were talking about earlier to do with force transmission, he had, through kind of more meditative practices, or, you know, listening and making small movements, he had understood the fine connection between those two bones and how weight went through it effectively, so that he didn't get in more trouble by twisting it and using it wrong. So the banana skin thing, I think, was just a way of him testing his integrity. So, you know, if you've got an issue, and you kind of want to, like, I think people do that now with injuries, where they go on those little wobble boards or something after an injury.
Yeah, you got the I've seen that here actually in Malta, where in the rehab, in physio rehab, where they
rehab places,
you go on one leg and stand up on you're on a half ball
and
thing.
it's just to test the integrity, and I think that's all he was doing. And he was learning. I mean, he was a judo fan, so he wasn't afraid of falling over, and that's like a fundamental aspect of, you know, the development out of judo into Feldenkrais has to do with falling. His first book was called I can't remember the exact title, but it has in it anxiety, gravitation, and sexual potency. And how he connected those three things was pretty impressive.
Okay.
So in relation to falling in judo, what he learned from judo was that in order to not be, you need to learn to fall well in order to not be afraid of falling.
Okay. Makes
Right?
sense. Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah.
And the fear of falling is one of those very primitive things that is affecting us all the time. So, we understand anxiety in a specific way, and it's psychological and it has a physiological response to it. But you can make a very clear correlation between the physical manifestation of anxiety and the physical manifestation of someone who's about to fall. The way that the muscular system contracts in order to deal with the falling state is very similar to what happens with an anxiety state. So he was kind of in a point in time where there was a lot of interesting thought coming out of the West, Freud, Jung, a lot of psychology, a lot of, mind-body divides, what it all means, Descartes, all of this, classic French philosophy. And he was interested. He was an interested guy. So he basically went through the process of studying what he believed the correlation between anxiety and gravity. So in the way that he understood it in terms of judo, the more stable you are, in fact, I'll give you an example. We can stand easier. It's more difficult for us to stand still than it is for us to move. So I don't know if you've ever heard those soldiers that have to stand for really long hours and stand in one position.
Chinese soldiers, aren't they? Or
I don't know, Russian soldiers, or I think even the British guys that stand in front of stand in front of Buckingham Palace. But in standing for so long, standing still for so long, there are people that actually pass out because it's actually relatively difficult to stand still for so long. But moving, we're very comfortable with movement. We can keep moving for a long period of time. So one of the things that kind of comes out of judo is that of course you need stability, but it's dynamic. So you don't want to be strong and stable, you want to be mobile and stable.
Of course.
So for example, if you're falling over in itself is not a bad thing if you can refine stability and refine it. So it's this kind of recovery process rather than I'm going to stay exactly where I am and you're not going to move me, which I think kind of ties in with the internal versus external martial arts as well. The external martial arts is I'm going to assert myself, I'm going to whack you from my position and you're going to fall over. Yeah. Whereas the internal martial arts were, okay, you want to do that? I'm just going to stand here and you're going to come towards me and I'm going to use your force and you're going to go over there.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Right? Yeah, I mean, you could actually, if you look at stunt actors, for example, when they're jumping from a higher height, then they go straight into a roll, right? Just to take
those come from judo and aikido.
Yeah, of course. Wow, it makes total sense.
So I mean, just kind of going back to the anxiety and falling thing, that we have these patterns in us from our evolutionary past. So for example, if you believe in that, I'm hopeful that we can talk about it in that way. I studied anthropology, so I spent some time at university kind of looking at the evolution of man and where we came from and where we split from primates and stuff like that. But I mean, essentially, in our evolutionary past, we were in trees and using our arms in very different ways to we do now. And part of that, and you see it in the baby's response to how they can hold on to something, even though they don't have muscle tone, the baby can actually hang on something when it's born. So it can...
Really?
Yeah, clenches its fist. There's a video. I can send it to you.
Oh, wow, I'll have to try that.
Yeah, the baby can clench its fist and be lifted up by it. And that's because of our evolutionary past to do with either holding on to our mum when she's moving through, trees, branches, or holding on to something, for safety. So there's an inherent gripping or holding on to something that is related to safety in our system.
Yeah, I see.
So, right. So, and the threat of falling is something that is also there evolutionarily. If we were to fall from a tree, that would be quite bad.
Yeah, of course.
The thing that relates, how he relates it to anxiety, is this contraction of the body to deal with falling or to try and regain safety is something that then becomes habitual. And maybe in a breathing lesson I could teach to do with holding the breath. So holding the breath is one way that we contract the system to refine safety. But obviously you can see from holding the breath that you don't really want to do that all the time. It's not beneficial for you to be holding your breath when you need new oxygen. So if you've got that as a habitual response to life, then obviously it's going to restrict you in some way. The same thing with muscular contraction. The tighter you are, and this is, one of the things that I love kind of like pointing out. If you ever see a bodybuilder, and those guys are like muscled up to their eyeballs. But if you look at how they move, right? If you just watch how, like, there's no fluidity. It's like,
yeah.
Right. and all of that is because the muscles are so so worked and so tight that there actually isn't much range of motion anymore.
Yeah, of course. That's why that's why they struggle to wipe their ass when they're.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what that shows is that as human beings, it's possible for us to develop, and I say develop, habits that aren't helpful for us. So you can develop as a bodybuilder, and you can be the best bodybuilder in the world, but at the end of it, you might not be able to get in your car very well, or be a functional human being in other ways.
Yeah, of course.
So and these kind of patterns, these habits that we have, whether it's postural, breathing, psychological, they in some way, if we've kind of got this response of like everything tightening and closing, then we reduce our mobility to finer and finer degrees, and to the point that we actually feel that we can't move, and that's a very frustrating feeling in itself. So there's some connection between kind of like openness, systematic openness, and possibility, that if you've kind of got a lot of fear or trauma or things like that you've had things in your life that have in some way emotionally made you contract, then that contraction is also along with being a safety mechanism, is also a restriction if it's habitual.
So is there a way then is this how Feldenkrais can help undo all this? Is this where it kind of starts? Is you come into, is this where you can help people then, really, people that suffer not only just from trauma, but just in general, just being able to kind of untangle some of these natural tensions? Yeah.
So we all have habits, right? We have habits of walking, we have habits of, because that's the way that we've developed. We've developed I've learned how to walk by making this movement. It might not be the ideal movement, but I've learned how to walk. So I'm just going to stick with it. And, all of the things that we do, whether it's writing or, even looking with eyesight, all of the things that we do, we've learned an ability, or we've learned to do it in a way that's very individual to us, different to everyone else. And if it's sufficient or just about sufficient for the purpose that we've got it for, we don't think of ever improving it. So most people don't think, unless they've got an issue, I could improve how I walk.
Or, it's like running and you go, oh yeah, I kind of run a bit funny, but it works.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that the Feldenkrais method, one of the things that it does really well is it provides a platform for people to investigate their own habits, to work with them, and potentially make changes to do with how they're organized. So, for example, someone that maybe has a, you know, like trauma or anxiety pattern or something like that, which is something that I've had in my life as well. That as you do a Feldenkrais lesson and your system learns that it can not hold itself in situations that it's used to holding itself, then your life opens up in a different way.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. Do you want a physical one?
Oh God, here we go. Yeah, sure. I wasn't ready for that, but I'm always game.
All right. So if you just clench your jaw, your jaw, yeah, and then just let it go, and clench your abdomen, muscles of your abdomen, and then let it go. And now clench your jaw and clench your abdomen and squeeze your hands together. Okay, and then let it go. All right, maybe you hold your breath as well at the same time.
Yeah, I did hold my breath.
Yeah. All right, so do it again. Do it again. And then think about turning just your body to the left, gently turning your whole body to the left. So you're clenching your jaw, tightening your stomach, holding your fist, and you're moving to the left. And then come back to the middle and let it go. And then move to the left without doing any of that.
I mean, it's totally, I mean, it's like night and day.
Yeah. So like so the context of like, you know, the book, Anxiety, Gravitation and Sexual, whatever he called it, the gravity aspect is potency. Yeah. So within the understanding of the Feldenkrais system is that if you start a lesson by getting a person to lie down on their back, then you've taken all of the postural or the activity, you've taken down the activity of the postural muscles. So the muscles that are used to hold us upright in gravity, gravity's acting on us all the time.
Of course, yep.
There's some activity to hold ourselves upright. As you lie down on your back, you let go of those postural muscles, which means your whole system is doing less work. And within the Feldenkrais understanding of things, when your system's working less, it can feel more. So this is something called the Web of Fechner Law, comes from physics, and it's basically signal to noise ratio. I mean, I think we spoke about this, you know, when we chatted briefly before, that, for example, if you're holding something very heavy and a fly lands on you, you're not going to feel it. But if you're holding a feather and a fly lands on you, because your system is not so engaged with the thing that it's doing, you're going to feel that moment where it lands on you.
Distracted at that point. Yeah, of course. Yeah, it makes sense.
So, you know, that principle is kind of throughout the method, that as you reduce effort, that you increase sensitivity, and sensitivity allows you to perceive differences. So what I just did in that little short exercise, show you the difference between what it feels like to move left clenching and what it feels like to move left without clenching, right? And your system is obviously going to prefer what it feels like to move left without clenching because it feels nicer.
Yeah.
But what you need in order to know that you're moving left generally with clenching is you need contrast. You need to be able to feel what you're doing versus when you're not doing it. You know, you need to provide the system with contrast. And that's the way that our nervous system learns. If it can feel a difference between this and that, then it's going to be able to differentiate the two and be like, I'm going to pick the easier one.
Is that a case of almost tricking the brain then as well? Because you're like because you're making it fully aware. Obviously, your body is feeling it, but your brain is also going to have some it's going to be involved in the decision making, surely, like going, okay, this is nice, or I'm tired, so let's try this, or are you totally overriding that?
I think it's not tricking it. I think it's actually understanding the mechanism that our nervous system works by. So the preference for energy efficiency is something that's really deeply ingrained in our system. If there's any thing that we can do using less energy, that's something that's like well before our conscious brain, you know, like the system prefers doing things that use less energy. You know, so as you show it, as you give it examples of things that are using less energy, so for example, you're using less contraction in order to do the thing that you're doing. Feldenkrais calls that parasitic contraction or parasitic activity, you know, muscular effort against the thing that you're trying to do. So I want to move left and I've got tension that's making me stay in the middle, you know, so I've got resistance to go in that direction.
Yeah.
But I think that the brain will be looking, the brain and the nervous system will be looking for what works better. And if you can provide it examples of what works better, then actually it's going to pick those every single time over what works less.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, exactly.
And that's really something that's kind of connected with the learning, like how we learn in general. So for example, writing or playing the piano or whatever skill we're trying to refine, that as we learn that skill, that our system is trying to work out how we can make it more efficient, how we can do it with less effort. And it's actually the effort that often makes us worse at it. So that it's actually, so, you know, there's this kind of idea like mastery. If you see what mastery is, there's kind of a finesse to it, you know, there's like an effortlessness. And
yeah. Okay. It's almost like the people have, like, you know, you see David Beckham or Roger Federer, you know, the way they strike a ball.
Exactly.
Actually, Roger Federer is a perfect example, because you have him who is all finesse. You know, he's not power. He doesn't look like he's slogging it like Djokovic or even.
But the power's still there. He doesn't like take off that much, but what he's got is a really high level of skill, right? And it's you see it, like, you know, there's a video of I forget his name. There's a judo practitioner that's like, you know, he was maybe in his 80s at the time of the video was shot, and he was like known to be this kind of like brutal martial artist, but he was like 5'6" or 5'7", tiny little guy, and in the video he's just floating around people, you know. Wow. He looks so light and effortless and easy, and you really see the skill level. But he's throwing guys that are like twice his size, really built, like muscular. And he's just like, yeah, I'm just going to float over here. But because he's kind of got that really refined skill level, it's just, you know, it looks effortless to him. So in some, like, you know, that's potential for us to all achieve mastery, has at its heart how we reduce effort in the thing that we're doing. So if it's singing, as another example, if you're like an amazing singer, if you're using too much effort when you're singing, that's causing strain on your vocal cords, or, you know, whatever part of the process. If you're an amazing musician, you know, and you're an amazing guitarist, the more effort you're using, the more strain you're putting on your body, you know, that's going in the direction away from mastery. Whereas actually mastery is really this kind of like effortless quality to it.
So it's almost trying to do the opposite to what you're typically told, which is, you know, keep pushing through the barrier.
Yeah.
It's almost like reverse that. Don't stress anything at all. Just try and calm the body, calm the mind, and then go inward, I guess. And then again, it's opposite to what we're taught. So I imagine this is quite a difficult difficult thing to instill into people.
It is. It is. I can tell you after teaching, and I see many other Feldenkrais teachers, how often they have to remind people to not make as much effort in the thing that they're asking them to do. Like, honestly, that's a continual process with each new person. Even myself, like even anyone as they're going through their own Feldenkrais lesson, learning like, how can I do this thing that I'm trying to do that I find difficult with less effort? How can I find an easy route to doing it? In terms of the, what you're saying about, like, so for example, like you said, we're taught that you should push and you should make effort, and that if it's
no
not
pain, no gain.
Yeah, if it's not painful, it's not worth doing.
Exactly.
And that, like, you achieve in life, or you succeed in life by like hard effort and applying yourself and discipline. And in some way, Feldenkrais is like so completely countercultural to that. I think that contributes to why it's not that popular yet.
Yeah, because it doesn't fit in, because everyone just stops doing stuff.
Because people don't understand that concept, that actually they could work less hard and achieve more. That's not something that's easy for people to accept, and they need the physical experience of it to go. Their system then goes, oh right, yeah, if I do small movements and I do them slowly, I can achieve the thing that I want to achieve without ever having to like make an effort.
Yeah, because I guess like even if you're putting if you're putting strenuous effort in, then you feel there's an achievement and reward system. Which comes into play. So how do you? I guess you have to also overcome the dopamine rush you would get from going pushing X amount of weights. So is there with Feldenkrais, is there a similar mechanism or some similar gains that you get from that, emotionally and more mentally?
Well, I think that to fully answer that question, I'd probably need a better scientific understanding. However, if you think about, achievement in terms of, because it does feel good when we achieve something that we want to, right? But it also feels good when we don't have to pay for it afterwards.
Yeah, especially when it comes to hangovers.
Yeah. So I think that, and you see this in a lot of sports, or, a lot of people that are in that very high performance, achievement orientated jobs in their life, that they do also get injured, and they do have quite serious, like Andy Murray in his back, for example.
Of course, yeah.
Staying on tennis, or his hip. I think it was his hip. But like all of that,
it's a repetitive strain, isn't it, that you're putting on your body?
Well, yeah, but I'm like, if you think about it in long terms, you can have that sense of achievement, and he's a Wimbledon champion, and I don't know how many other titles he's got, but he's living with recurring pain in his hip at the same time, So like the payoff, or the long-term situation, like as he gets older, he stops playing tennis, he's not doing that stuff anymore, but he's, worked his body in such a way that injury is always going to be a part of his experience. So there's kind of like a longer term perspective, like how are we going to be as individuals as we grow older? Like I can, like you're talking about alcohol, like I could go out and I could drink, like, not that I can, because I literally physically can't, but like drink to my heart's content every day and not worry about it because I'm relatively young and my system can recover. But all of those things are having an internal impact, that it's asking my organs to work in a specific way. it's introducing a certain toxicity into my blood. It's making me, I don't know, like maybe loosen neural connections that they say like happens with like, weed use or drinking, like, and there's an accumulative effect to all of those things. And as you grow older, like we at this age don't know if we're going to be paying for it. One of the things that I remember saying to a friend of mine is, like this kind of craze of cycling that, I don't know how, like cycling's not a particularly old sport.
No.
Right.
Like, cycling with 40, they just get all the lycra on.
Yeah. But like you see people and like they are like cycling machines, their bodies are built to cycle. They've got these calf muscles that are ridiculous. Their back can bend in, like amazing ways that they're just like, you see them on a bike and you're like, wow, like you are an athlete. What my thought was about it is like, that obviously changes the body in a specific way. It's like you're developing in this direction, but does it have an effect, or is it going to be useful? Is it going to negatively affect you in later life? Like we don't know that stuff because we haven't gone through enough time to observe the effect of some of these things that are relatively recent. So for example, you see a bodybuilder that as they get old, the challenges that they face because of what they've done, or like an NFL player that's got concussions, like they had success and they earned money, but they came out, or a boxer, same thing. They come out of it and that there's some accumulative effect of the thing that they've been trying to achieve. Yeah. And you've got that instantaneous dopamine hit, but what are you dealing with for the rest of your life?
So it's a trade-off though, right? I mean, I think unless you're saying, and I don't think you are saying this, but sadly, the Feldenkrais method is not going to turn you, if you're just going to do that, you're not going to turn into a Wimbledon champion overnight, are you? You are still going to have to, or is that something you can do alongside your training? Is that the difference?
Yeah, I think it's very much, I think that like if you read about or you investigate some of the way that Federer practices, he I think it's called active attention. They, like the high level sports stuff, they're interested in these really small refinements in their ability, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like, how can I just organize my body in this specific way? Yeah. And that's effectively what we do in the Feldenkrais method, but we do it for everyone, So
okay,
like everyone can improve the way that they move. One of the quotes that Moshe used is that there is no limit to the improvement of movement. Whatever that you do, that you currently do, you can always improve on it. You can always get better. So the Feldenkrais method, as I would say, it's not a form of exercise, it's a form of learning. And that learning you can apply to whatever you're doing. He worked with famous basketball players, famous musicians. He worked in so many different ways with like disabled people, people with neurological challenges, people dealing with injury, high level performing ballet dancers, like really anything, but the reason it can apply to anything is because it's how you approach yourself, so if I approach myself in a way that is not imposing, it's not like I think we spoke about this before, but like the external expectations versus our internal implicit desires. So for example, if I've got some sense that, I go to school and I've got some sense that there's some external pressure of I need to achieve this, otherwise I'm not a valid human being, then obviously I work in a way during that period because I'm trying to match someone else's standards.
Yeah.
And it's not going to end well. Whereas actually if I come at these things and I'm like, what is it that I'm interested in? What do I want for myself? and I listen to that and I kind of like stay on that track, then I'm coming from a place that is, I think that the achievement and kind of gaining skill, it comes from a very different place. And if you can listen to yourself and be kind and don't take it too seriously, play with it, and see the benefit of doing things a little slower, a little less, taking more care, then actually you'll notice changes in yourself that will be rewarding in their own way.
It's very much going, I think you said this earlier anyway, but very much going inward. So, you know, your typical kind of fitness, as you said earlier, can be seen as very like, oh, you know, I'm muscular now and everything, but then there may be, and this is much like if you're at the gym and you're just lifting big weights, it's always fake muscle. It's not good muscle.
Yeah.
You're saying actually slow everything down, go really inside,
yeah,
and then start preparing, you know, from the foundations, if anything.
Yeah.
And that way all your movements will be more deliberate as opposed to quick, fast, and dirty, let's say.
Yeah. It's a good phrase. Quick, fast, and dirty. But I think like one of the reasons why that's the case is that as you're slowing down and as you're doing small movements, then you're judging it by how you feel internally, and you're not judging it by what other people are seeing. So it's not a performance. Like human beings, our life, it's not a performance. You know, we shouldn't be holding ourselves to other people's standards.
Oh, so you know inside exactly, you know, it's your work, this is your
own life, it's your own path. You need to live it in the way that feels right. And I think that what Feldenkrais does so well is that it provides a platform for very obvious feedback. That feedback coming straight from the body, and in terms of how comfortable or how easy or, you know, how effortless a movement is, a very small movement like moving your arm or turning to the left or whatever, and that feedback is immediate because the body is the first thing that we sense, right? If you are looking for like psychological ease or emotional ease, you know, what your thoughts are doing and what your emotions are doing, it's a little bit less tangible. Whereas the body provides like really instantaneous feedback. If I'm working too hard, I can feel my body kind of feeding that back to me. Like, oh, that's becoming painful. You know, that's, you know, like it doesn't feel nice. So like, as you go through a Feldenkrais class and as you go through continued Feldenkrais classes, the thing that you're doing is you're learning to listen to yourself. And that's kind of what you're saying about this kind of like internal motivation rather than external motivation. And
I guess you have to jump in on it. Is that also a part of turning the brain off? You listening to your body as opposed to your brain, or is there some link? And the reason I ask is because you have, I don't know if you read the Power of Now, but that talks about separating your, you know, you have a little voice, but then be aware of it. Don't necessarily always go with it, because that is just a different part of you, essentially. So, and I know when you do meditation, kind of that voice can be, or that, you know, well, maybe it's just me, maybe I've got these crazy voices, but no, maybe it's almost kind of like the breathing mechanisms I've done personally. You've so focused on that, and like you're breathing quite heavily, like, and that way you have to, and you're constantly focusing, and that way you can't focus on anything else, and there's a way of shutting it down. Is there something similar you do to people to kind of quieten that noise?
Yes, but there's kind of two parts to that answer. One being the acknowledgement that you can't really ever separate the body and the mind.
Interesting.
That we, and this is something that kind of goes back to Descartes, which is like the French philosopher, that he was separating the mind and body and calling them two separate things. But actually it's really not the case. Any thought or any sensation or feeling that you have is accompanied by muscular contraction. It's like, you know, the two things that from the point that we're born, the development of our conceptualization about the world it's all related to the body. It's all completely tied at every single step. If I think about left and right, if I think about an object, if I, like if it's food, it's to do with sensation and how it makes me feel. It's like the body is never separate to our ideas. So I think that for me, and I have done a lot of these kind of meditation practices, and yeah, of course I've heard of Eckhart Tolle. But I think that one of the things that Feldenkrais, and maybe Tai Chi as well, is that it actually gives the mind a job, and that job is paying attention to movement. And because movement is so perceptible and so obvious, it actually is a lot easier than just saying, like, for example, like, don't think
of nothing. Yeah, which is difficult when it's like just saying think of anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's quite good, because you're almost, it's almost like the brain is a child, and you're going, okay, like just keeping you focused on this whilst we actually work on the body at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I did last year, or for a couple of years, was work for a homeless charity called St. Mungo's. And I went in there and I did like a weekly session of Feldenkrais for people that were recovering homeless or recovering drug addicts.
Interesting. Okay.
I kind of, it was like, the phrase "cut your teeth."
Yeah,
like
I was like a bit of a tough crowd as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I put myself in a position where it was like, I'm really testing this method on people that are the most in need of it. People that are very anxious, their thoughts are, really distracted. And what I noticed as I was doing that is the more I could get them to pay attention to just very simply what their body was doing, their minds would calm down. And I had another student who comes to my regular class say something similar, like, I've done meditation for years, and within one class of yours, I've felt more calm and more at ease in myself than I've ever felt doing a meditation class.
Wow.
And I'm not saying that that's me doing something special. I'm saying that the mechanism of, kind of concentrating on movement and making small movements and listening to feeling and listening to sensation, like, I don't know, what's the word? It's so interesting. It feels interesting, and you get into it and you're so deeply in the felt sense of yourself that when you come out of it, you're like, I feel really good. I feel really connected to myself. I feel myself, I feel like myself. And I think that that's kind of where it becomes a spiritual path, or, whatever, however you want to say it, like this sense of like, I want to really be who I am, and I want to be capable of everything that I'm capable of being,
Well, in a way, I mean, you could say by going so inward and removing all expectations, because it's just you.
Yeah.
And you have no expectations of yourself. You just have hope.
Yeah.
And I think that way you're not being impressioned by anyone. Like, I can imagine, I don't know if you've been away on holiday by yourself or not traveling.
Yeah.
But I did it for the first time in my early 30s. And it was incredible, because every day you wake up and do exactly what you want. So, when you remove the expectations of, and family, friends, may all be, I don't want to say justified, but, with good intent.
Yeah.
But it's an expectation nonetheless.
Yeah.
And I think then when you are within yourself, that's when you are, or you're able to channel this. That's when you are really at peace. So it does make so much sense. And especially right now, where there's so much going on in the world, viruses or, everything else, media just constantly filling us with anything and everything that's negative. Like seeing about asteroids coming now, it's ridiculous. So I think this is, let's say, is potentially a real way to just switch everything off.
Yeah.
And just going here. So that's really interesting. But where would you? So typically, I imagine your answer to this will be everyone. But who would be most at need initially of something like a Feldenkrais session or lesson, or if they're like
I'm going to answer that. I'm going to answer that in a different way. So the challenge that we face as Feldenkrais practitioners is that there are obviously so many other modalities out there: yoga, Pilates, Alexander technique, meditation, Vipassana retreats, this kind of retreat, that kind of retreat, ayahuasca. Like, you know, there's whatever you can think of is available for people to do, right? The challenge that I notice in myself, and I notice for other Feldenkrais practitioners, is how do you present this stuff in a way that has meaning to people, and that they feel that it's kind of directly relevant to themselves and their own life. And I think that in a one-to-one conversation, I can explain that really well. You know, I can be like, you know, Jamie, I'm pretty sure that, you know, maybe that accident that you had some physiological effect. Let's do this thing. You know, you can feel the differences, see if you like it. And then afterwards, you know, we'll come back and chat again, you know. And I think that one of the things that I think is the best about the Feldenkrais method is that once you've got an experience of that, the sensitivity, and then to tell the difference between this and that, it's very obvious to your system that there's something in this stuff. You know, it's very obvious in your system that it feels nice to use less effort, and it's a nice thing for you to do, to be looking after yourself and learning about yourself and doing movement. I think the challenge is then, how do you differentiate Feldenkrais from other modalities? And I think that the way that I've kind of maybe done in this interview, or, you know, is to do with like the chat. Well, the way that I've done this in this, you know, particular conversation is like focusing on how we learn and our ability to learn. And I think that is something that applies to everyone. And some people are maybe more acute or more in need. So for example, if someone's injured themselves or they can't walk well, you know, so there's a lot of Feldenkrais practitioners that work with people with disability or, like, you know, neurological challenges. And that's a whole portion of the work. There's another portion of the work that maybe comes from Feldenkrais practitioners and their own experience of playing music, that they work with musicians, improving their ability, making them feel more easy. There's another aspect of the work that's to do with sports performance, you know, improving someone's ability to, you know, maybe shift their weight as they're running, or, you know, like know what their spine's doing, coiling and uncoiling as they're doing explosive movement. Like there's a real a breadth to this stuff, that's because it's essentially about human movement, you know, and you can't narrow that down really. So maybe an alternative way for me to answer that is like, how do you think that I could explain this stuff to other people that would make it more relevant to them, and, like, you know, give them a sense that there's something useful for them in it?
I think it goes back to the point that you made earlier with one of your students, around how utterly pleasant or calm they felt. And obviously you get that with you do get that with meditation, get that with yoga. So I guess it's kind of, it's whether you want to jump in that group, but then offer a different type of well-being afterwards. My one question is around people that are paralyzed. Are they, or stroke victims that don't feel on one side?
Did you know that I worked with a stroke victim for a couple of years?
I didn't.
I did do that.
Okay. And how was that?
So he had a brainstem stroke. He was a 71-year-old guy called Barry.
Okay.
I did care work for about 3 years. He passed away in December last year because of recurrent respiratory issues that he had. But I worked with him for about 2.5 years. And when I got there, he was in a massive amount of discomfort. His body was very locked up and tight. He couldn't sit up straight. He was kind of falling over at every moment. He was dribbling. couldn't feed himself, couldn't really talk properly. So the brain stem, the damage to the brain stem was pretty global. He had lost maybe 98% of his ability to move.
Wow. Okay. Really severe. Okay.
Yeah. So it's different to a normal stroke, which is, the normal strokes are either affecting one side. So you lose ability on one side, but you've still got ability on the other side. Yeah. It's kind of the same. So it's kind of the same in terms of that any part, and I'm not sure if I talked to you about this before, but for example, we've got this kind of image of ourselves in our brain, and it's called the homunculus. And it's this kind of weird figure that's disproportionately sized in relation to certain parts of ourselves. So for example, our hands, our mouth, our eyes, our ears, our genitals are all really well represented on our brain. So they kind of take up a big portion of it. The rest of our body is less well proportioned. So for example, if I have some brain damage that affects my thumb, because my thumb is such an integral part of myself that I use in very many ways, and it's so interlinked with all other aspects of my brain, that if you have brain damage to the place that controls your thumb, it's really difficult to redevelop it. Whereas if you have brain damage to the area that controls your leg, that is actually something that is recoverable from.
Wow.
This is different to nerve damage to do with, like, an injury that's maybe severed nerves in the spine, which you'd lose leg use.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
This is more to do with the brain.
Yeah. Okay.
So in that respect, so I worked with Barry for a couple of years, and I was there teaching him lessons every morning. He was a wicked guy. He lived in Fulham. We had such a laugh. Like, honestly, that was like, probably one of the better things that's happened in my life. Spending that time with him. I worked either 5 or 6 days a week with him for that whole period.
Wow. Okay.
With him for about 2 hours. About an hour of that was care work, and then the other part I was doing Feldenkrais and neurological work with him.
Yeah.
Over that period, by the end of the period that I was working with him, he was able to push down with his legs on his bed. So I'd tilt his bed, the medical beds that can tilt. Tilt it so he was on an angle. I'd bend his knees, and he could push himself back up the bed using his leg strength.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And that was something that he couldn't obviously do when I got there. He was sitting so much more comfortable. He was more relaxed, was able to relate to people better. Obviously, he still had issues. He had a catheter. He would get breathing problems. That was a part of his life. But the thing, there was a certain point where I saw him do something, or like do a mannerism, or like have a laugh in a certain way. And it made me go, the thing that I'm doing is not recovering his legs or arms or whatever. The thing that it felt like, it kind of impacted me. I was like, I'm giving him back to himself. Because I saw a look on his face that he was just like, I'm me, and I think that a lot of the challenge of stroke is that people feel like that they've lost themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I can attest to this. My mum's still suffering quite badly with a stroke. And she is still, like, her speech has gone backwards, if anything, but I think that's also been down to the care home she was put in and everything else. So for me, it's something, and my mum was always, like, she used to be a Reiki master. So very aware. Her mind is still working, which is brilliant, but she's just struggling with the lack of being able to communicate. And then the other bit, her right hand side is now, so she almost kind of, her right arm is like a cat almost, like always just on a, it doesn't work. So even for me, I'm finding this really interesting as a potential route, really, as to help with
I think it's great at that stuff. It's really in my own experience and the experience I had listening to other people talk about strokes, there's a book actually, if you're interested, The Case of Nora, which was written by Moshe at a certain point, and he worked with someone who had a stroke and documented the whole case study about it. So if you want to grab that and have a read of it, it's like, he was an amazing thinker as well as an amazing kind of worker, if that makes sense.
Yeah. The Case of Nora, yeah.
Case of Nora, yeah. And that comes from the title. It's influenced by his love of Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So he was a big lover of Sherlock Holmes, and he had extensive library of Sherlock Holmes. And there's I can't remember the Case of the Baskervilles, or no, there's one that has that similar title name, The Hound of the Baskervilles. But there's one that's like the case of something, and that book is kind of a reference to that. And one of the things that he got from, I think, reading about Sherlock Holmes was this attention to very fine detail. So noticing when someone does something in a different way and being able to relate that with something else, and being that observant of someone else and their process. Really made him an amazing guide in this particular work,
Again, I think the being able to firstly have a brain like that, and be so aware back then, perhaps, and it may be wrong, but perhaps would have been a little bit easier than what it is now, because you don't have computers in your hands and notifications or advertisements slapping you from every different angle. So ultimately flooding your brain with just useless stimulation. So it's wow, this is really, really interesting. I just wonder, like I say, it's so interesting that why it's not as prevalent as it should be, because even some of the things I've watched on it, it's all looked a bit stuffy, a bit old. Like, even some of the films have been like from the 80s or 90s, just doesn't look very modern, I guess. And maybe that's the what it needs is a bit of a modification, or just bringing to the 21st century. Everything the same, but just maybe just a little bit of bloody sparkle put around it,
exactly.
I
think that's part of the issue, is because as soon as you don't want to glamorize it, because then it becomes about external image again. So it's like, we're kind of in that sort of like paradox. Like, how do you, I don't know, maybe it's like wholesome, maybe that's the right word to describe it. It's kind of got this like old school wholesome, like, mum's home crumble, apple crumble or something, like, it's kind of got that like, real wholesome, good for your soul quality to it. And I've seen teachers, my peers, people that are, more experienced than me in their approaches to advertising, their approaches to putting it out there. And I don't think there are particularly any right answers. Myself, I think I do head down that route, to do with what you were saying, to do with kind of like that contrast between like how you can access yourself in meditation, and how movement can be useful in that way. And that's to do with my own inner journey and self-investigation, and my love of that kind of spiritual side of life. But equally, I teach a class on Monday nights that at the moment I've got a title for it, Feldenkrais for self-improvement. And you might think that that's kind of more of like an external motivation, like, that I want to improve, or I want to improve myself, I want to get my body better. But I think that in all of us, there's a desire to improve. Like, there is that kind of inbuilt, like, life is about going forward, improving what we're doing, getting the most out of it, feeling good. And those things require, for want of a better word, effort. you know. So it's not that effort is a bad thing. Like it's not bad for you to like make things and try things, and you know, like we've got to do that stuff. I think when we were talking about before, you were talking about being self-employed, you know, and that you know, that sense of like being your own person and being able to be free to do what you want. That's the zest of life.
Well, yes, it gives you a sense of, I think, this is when I was talking about, I think about few, and that basically what I'm trying to, I wasn't going to talk about it actually this time, but when it is launched, end of June, I guess the big thing we're trying to do with that is really try and, whilst help the practitioners out there, people like yourself, you know, people in all guises, in holistic health, fitness and well-being, help kind of make their services more accessible to the regular person that need the encouragement. So we also want to help them. The big driver is getting the person that, say they have a couple of kids, they have a wife, you know, they are the main provider for their household, whether it be the wife or the husband, and they may have this job that may pay them a decent salary, they have but because they have a mortgage, because they have kids, because they have whatever, they feel trapped. And what happens at that point? That's when you're like, okay, when you feel trapped and unhappy within yourself, that's when things start manifesting in other guys, like addiction, or you know, alcoholism, drug addiction, sex addiction, you know, whatever, you know, it doesn't have to just be addiction anyway. It could just be like, you know, just you come out in so this is where like the mind-body syndrome.
Your body's part of your mind, so it's you're gonna have symptoms.
Things, it's going to manifest. And I think what we're trying to do is actually give people an opportunity that, okay, you earn a good salary, so what we can do is provide the user, you know, provide enough reassurances and revenue and almost revenue guarantees for them to then actually go within themselves, find out what means something to them, whether that be pottery. I want to own my own pottery studio. It's like, okay, great. That's, for me, that is related to the mind. Like, you know, that's part of your spirit. This is you. So then it's like
creativity.
Exactly. Go and do that. Go and hone your skill. You know, find out how to get to the point where you can then teach others. And then we can give you a platform and we'll bring people to you, because then when you are, and this goes into anything, when you're doing something you love, you vibrate at a much higher frequency. And then that has a knock-on effect to other people. Is this ripple, these constant ripples that even if you're just walking down the street, people, or go into a room, people pick up on it. And this is, you know, ultimately what it sounds very hippified. And if you
not to me, I mean, maybe to other people, but to me,
of course, I know. But even,
I'm on board.
people that know me from I say my time in London. To now, it's probably not what you would expect, I guess, but it's something that I truly this is why I really resonate with Feldenkrais, because it's all about shutting off all stimulants and only allowing yourself to stimulate yourself. And it's like that's where you find, you know, where, you know, I'm big on the gut. You know, I think that there's power in your guts. You know, you can feel the energy from it. So it's like
to
light that fire, basically. So no, I think this is really, really interesting.
Like just to kind of, you know, like follow on that, like for me, I think that if I were to articulate why I care about Feldenkrais, why I want it to be more out in the world, it's really to do with it being my passion. You know, like that's really like deep in me. There was a point where it helped me, like, you know, deal with anxiety. I was going through a breakup. You know, it was massively useful to me in my life at that time. And in a way that nothing else was, you know, nothing else could quite quench that experience for me. But every time I did a Feldenkrais lesson, I felt like I reset myself. I came back to myself and I was able to go out in the world again. Like, so it was like, you know, a big psychological, physical support for me. At a certain point, I decided like I'm going to do the training, and that training is a 4-year training. That's not a small commitment, you know. 4 years of your life, certain amount of money to do it. You know, to me, it was much like, you know, what you're saying about changing direction. I was like, this is really what I want to do. And
it's
I wrote that
in yourself, isn't it? End of the
yeah,
day.
exactly. It was for me. And, you know, but like one of the things I remember thinking about it, I remember thinking that part of my justification for it, part of my reasoning was it's incredibly good for me to go on this training, but then it's also incredibly good for anyone I encounter and work with in the future. So it's like there was no negative aspect of it. You know, it's good for me and it's good for others. All right, let's go.
It's essentially you are, and I remember Ferdinand saying this, who was on one of our previous episodes. It's about value. You're basically adding, you're giving people value, you're adding value to someone's life.
Yeah.
And firstly your own, because you know, unless you sort yourself out, you can't help others.
Yeah.
But then you are then going, okay, I'm adding value into your actual life. I'm not giving you paper.
Yeah.
This is actually giving you something that you will take from within, and this will have a positive knock-on effect to the rest of your life.
There's a quote from Feldenkrais that I remember reading, and I'm probably going to massacre it. But it was quite a long quote. So, but I remember reading it before I started the training, and it was one of those things that I was just like, this guy, he gets it. And it was basically along the lines of, if you can teach someone to love themselves, then that is worth its weight in gold. No profession, I can't remember exactly the way he says it, but like, it's not something that's easy to come by, a profession or a path in life that helps people learn how to love themselves. So wherever you go in your life, whatever you do, you will always be needed, because everyone needs that. You know, and I think that for me was just like, that was the nail in the coffin. I was like, yep, I'm on board.
Well, I don't know. I think you've just unintentionally. I think you just marketed Feldenkrais. Okay, learn to love yourself again.
Yeah.
Which is the most important thing at the moment. Again, especially right now with a year of 6 months of bombardment of negative press and well, I'm not going to say energy actually, because I think one of the things I've actually noticed with the whole lockdown and everything else, despite the challenges, is that people are actually happier. You know, even though there are kind of threats to jobs and everything else, but I think it's just kind of forced them to stop or slow down and you know, unintentionally go within, because there's Netflix only lasts for so long. There's no sport, you know, and I love sport, but you know, that's not on. So you kind of like, you know, all of these typical stimulus have been removed, which has then forced people to look internally and be like, okay. And I can honestly, I can see, I'm on Twitter a lot, and I could just see the types of maybe individuals that you wouldn't think, okay, they're now thinking a bit more energetically. That's nice to see. So I think we are going through a bit of a shift, and I think this will.
I think it relates to something that I was talking about earlier, and something that you said in terms of like how overstimulated we are. You know, there's so many things in our modern world that are grabbing our attention, taking our attention, you know, and how often is it that we have time and attention for ourselves? Not very often, you know, unless you kind of consciously create it, go on a Vipassana retreat, or, you know, have a daily meditation practice, or whatever it is, do pottery, you know, like read a book, create time for yourself and your own attention. But one of the things that I think it relates to is this sense of overstimulation, and that signal to noise ratio that I was talking about earlier. So the more noise there is in your system, the less sensitive you become. So when your system is overworking, overloaded, thinking a lot, then it's actually really difficult for you to tell what's right for you. You know, you can't feel it very easily because there's so much noise and activity. And when things slow down and when the noise reduces, you actually get access to your inner guidance system. You know, like it's like a compass, and it appears once the noise level is reduced a little bit, and you feel like maybe this thing that I was doing, you know, I've done it for 10 years, but actually it doesn't feel right for me anymore, you know. But you've been doing it and going through the motions, but you know, because you're so kind of caught up in it and life's so busy, you don't ever have time to kind of come back to yourself and reflect. So I think that lockdown has done that for a lot of people. It's kind of like, let all the noise reduce, and then people are like, oh, actually I really want to do this, or I don't want to do that anymore, or you know, this is who I want.
I think it will be the latter. I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
that's going to be the thing, and that's because as hopefully it will switch has gone off to be like, what was I doing before? Why am I wasting 2 hours a day traveling to a job I don't actually enjoy? What's the point? And what am I actually doing in my life? So hopefully I think this will be, by the end of the year, hopefully everyone will be in a slightly better place than we are now. That's all.
And maybe even consumerism has been changing a little bit as well, because we've been stuck in our houses. You don't need to go out and buy 10 pairs of trainers. Yeah,
I would say that I still do. If you see my Instagram, I've got a ridiculous row. But I do appreciate the fact that you don't. I used to go out, eat out all the time and things like that. It's actually, I found it nicer than just to have the time to start. Just cook more. Is actually, because typically your home cooked meal is always going to be nicer than something thrown together out, in a shoddy restaurant. So
there's a reason why it's called fast food, right?
Yeah, of course.
It's fast because there's no love in it. No. You know, it's just like I was saying about homeliness earlier. You know, like there is that, and I think it relates to what you were saying about the connection between the brain and the gut as well. That actually that part of our system requires time and comfort and relaxation while we digest. If our body's in this kind of constant go mode and we're trying to digest something at the same time, it really doesn't give our body the optimal energy availability in order to digest well.
Well, interestingly about that, there's Evan was saying actually previously that if you are at 70% heart rate, so so you're exercising at 70%. So I think this is like a brisk walk.
Yeah.
Then your digestion shuts off.
Yeah.
So then you just malabsorb. You're just
exactly.
it's just pointless. So
so have you ever been in a situation where you've thrown up because you're too busy, too active? Like, so if someone, for example, if someone's under threat, or they have a threatening situation, their body will get rid of the food that's in their system because it needs all the available energy for getting themselves out of that situation.
Yeah, okay, the whole kind of fight or flight. Yes.
Yeah, the fight or flight stuff, So there's this sense that, the optimal functioning of our system needs the ability to slow down and relax at times, not forever. You want to be able to be active and run for the bus and like go and do stuff as well. But like at times when you're digesting or you need to go to sleep, if your brain's too busy when you want to go to sleep, that's not good for you. Sleep's an important part of our system, like our brain uses sleep to kind of like clear out toxins from the brain, like, pump stuff out, it's just so deep and rich what our body does. But for example, if we stay up and we have like screen time till 2 a.m, and then we're rushing about eating food on the fly.
Well, people that sleep 5 hours and then they're up and they're just going on adrenaline. It's not sustainable.
And that's like I was saying earlier about the long-term effect of that. You're using your adrenaline, you're using your kidneys in a specific way, your adrenal glands in a specific way, and that's going to take its toll when you're 60 or 70. And we're not. And I don't know if that's a cultural difference. I think in Japanese culture they definitely think in a long-term. In a different way, they've kind of got this like very high age range.
Of course, the oldest typically.
Yeah.
I don't know. Malta must be up there. That's where there's everyone's 100 on this island.
Yeah, exactly.
I know it's
but then you think again, so what's the speed of life there?
well, it's a lot slower. It's brilliant over here. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. I think that's the frantic life that surrounds that support cities, just again, are not sustainable.
Yeah.
So it's and also the energy that is typically in a city is not always good. So
Yeah.
it's something definitely worth looking at, I'd say. So just wrapping up then. Obviously this has been so super interesting and really, really good to catch up. And obviously we're not in the studio, as you've probably noticed. This isn't quite the studio this time because of the technical difficulties we had with it, but we managed to make it work. At least this.
I'm glad. Yeah, we've finally got this sorted out. And
yeah, exactly. So if people obviously want to learn to love themselves again, how or just actually have questions around Feldenkrais, or even how the course you took and how you got to where you are.
Yeah.
Is there what's the best way to get a hold of you?
So first, my website. That's www.thoughtfulmovements.co.uk.
Sure.
Thoughtful Movements, all one word. And then on Facebook, you can access me via my Facebook page,
sure.
which again is facebook.com/thoughtful movements.
Thoughtful Movement. Okay, so Thoughtful Movements is the company. Okay.
Yeah. And I've got daily short 20-minute movement meditations that I'm doing every weekday at 11 UK time.
Okay, very nice.
I do that Monday to Friday. And those are free of charge. Obviously, if people are interested in donation, they can.
Yeah.
But I'm making those available to the public during this period because, obviously, we're all going through something that's a bit different.
Yeah.
And we need support. So.
It's good, I guess, to allow people to have a little taster of it as well.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. Kind of spreading the word, getting my face out there. And then I've also got a Facebook group, which you can find from my page, or it's just facebook.com/groups/thoughtful movements.
Yeah.
And in that you can get the details for my weekly classes. I teach a class on a Monday night, 8 till 9 UK time, and that's to do with self-improvement. I teach some relatively challenging lessons in that. You think that Feldenkrais has this kind of like slow, conscious quality to it, but some of the lessons, for example, a couple of weeks ago, I was teaching people how to do a headstand.
Oh wow! Okay.
So it's got some dynamic aspects to it because he obviously came from a judo background. He was not shying away from movement, in all its diverse aspects.
So it's not all laying on the bed, basically.
It's not all relaxation. In fact, one of the quotes that he had was that I'm not teaching people relaxation. I'm teaching them how to wake up. It's a very different thing. It's like you want to be alive, you want to be full of life, you want to be active, and relaxation is an aspect of that and having a good life, but not all of it. So that my class is Monday night. Saturday I do a class that is more in that direction of relaxation, and that's another Feldenkrais class, 1 p.m. on a Saturday. And then Sunday I have a Qigong class that is kind of more the Tai Chi, Qigong, energy work, Qigong for self-healing, and that's 9:45 till 11 on a Sunday.
Are these all physical lessons, or can you do them online, or is there a hybrid? Is there a mixture?
They're all on Zoom.
Brilliant.
Zoom.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay.
Those 3 classes, the Monday, the Saturday, and the Sunday, they're all on Zoom.
Oh, wow.
The daily 20-minute lessons, they're all on my Facebook page.
Yeah.
And if you want to, you can just, like, if you watch one of them, you can just subscribe to it, and then it will pop up on your notifications every day.
Wow. Well, Joe, honestly, this has been super interesting, and I'll probably kind of be in touch afterwards as well, just about even helping my mum out, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is, it sounds like you're on a really, really good path. And obviously it's something that has clearly been in you from a young age.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing this progress for you, and if you can have an impact of the people in the UK, Malta, even across Europe, even further afield. it'll be great to kind of in the future kind of see a Netflix episode with you in, like, you know, how Feldenkrais has evolved.
Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop
That's
series.
it.
Yeah.
So so kind of keep on persevering with it, and
Thanks, man.
And I'm sure you'll end up in a great place. So
yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to have a chat on your podcast. That obviously helps me, exposure and the Feldenkrais method getting out there.
Yeah, it's great, and of course I'll share it everywhere I can, and if there's any bits you need me to share, just let me know. But it's been super useful, and obviously we've spoken a fair bit before this anyway. So this is just actually added. This is just adding more to it, really, which is brilliant. So
cool,
brilliant. Okay, man, well, really good to see you.
Yeah,
and,
you too.
Let's stay in touch, and I'll see you again soon, no doubt.
Yeah. All right. Enjoy your day.
Will do. All the best. Cheers, man.
Yeah. Bye.